with the political parties and the Chief Operations Officer of SALGA, the issue of coalitions receiving a lot more attention than has perhaps ever been the case before. Not a surprise, given what we're seeing on the board, but also the humbling, experience that especially the main political parties in South Africa has gotten in this election. My panel of analysts is back to talk about what Lance Joel from SALGA had to say, but also what we got from political parties by way of initial reaction. That framework that SALGA is putting on the table is, of course, yet to be tabled before political parties, your National Department of Cooperative Governance, and a whole host of other interested parties. Just to remind you of where things stand by way of election results. From the latest that we got from the IEC, progress in the finalization of results now stands at 89.8%. They also said that 99.3% of results are already in the system, awaiting scanning as well as auditing, and they committed to dealing with the remaining results expeditiously. Let's now get to that conversation with Professor Susan Boyson and Ibrahim Fakir. You were listening in as Lance Joel had to say around issues of commonality, that parties should at all times try and find areas of commonality first. And I'm going to go through it point by point. Just on that particular issue, if we may start there, Prof.
Yes. It's so important. It's the foundation of any healthy coalition.
Probably goes without saying.
Yes, exactly. Except that the commonality that we've seen political parties in South Africa frequently, if not mostly, revert to is that of shared interest in patronage and possessions and insight into which tenders are in the offering and which desk and which office and which perks they're going to get. That is the sting that has to be taken out of these coalition process by making processes. And it's so important too. Transparency goes hand in hand with that we have to be open, share with the public, be accountable. Coalition partners frequently stop being accountable to the electorates when they start making deals and when they start adding up the numbers. And that's where the political parties, much of the character of political parties actually had to be taken out of this coalition agreement before it's going to work. And I'm afraid it's not going to help much to have a general guideline there. That needs to be regulated.
I think the whole framework idea is with a view to getting there ultimately to legislation and but hey, I don't know. So your thoughts, Ibrahim?
I'm tempted to say I listened, but I didn't hear. I'm not so much a fan of this idea just on this question of regulation and legislation at some point. It's to me an approach which tries to bureaucratize politics, and I'm not sure that you can necessarily do so. But to your first question about points of commonality, I mean, from 2016, what were the points of commonality? The points of commonality was let's keep the ANC out, even though they had the largest number of votes, right? So they're the largest party. Now, I think if you want to talk about principles, principles are good, and I think having a framework, as Salga is suggesting, is important, but I think that's where it should end. So first principle for me would be fairness and equity. Fairness and equity would mean you try to go as far as possible to accommodate the party which has the largest number of votes, even though I agree with Lengwa that you can't say the party which got the largest number of votes must be given first option to form government. Let me give you a scenario. The ANC, for example, let's just say, for example, wins the largest share of votes in a city like Joburg, But the fragmentation that follows after them, all the parties, and the second largest party, for example, would be the DA, and then following that is a lot of fragmentation, right? Small little bit parties. Now imagine the ANC is given the first option. And their first option is to go for parties which they know they can bargain with and promise things to, and then say, right, you support us. Now there's a whole bunch of bid players that they have to keep negotiating with. And those bid players, like a tail wagging a dog, consistently make demands on them and threaten to withdraw their support. Which means you are in constant negotiation mode, firstly, and secondly, you are incentivizing instability. So, I agree that the principles and the framework matter, but I'm not so sure about legislating, to be perfectly honest. Bureaucratize something that can't be bureaucratized.
Well, I mean, they didn't say that. I mean, these are my assumptions. And mind you, we are here because of a lot of wrongs, a lot of things that went wrong, especially over the past 5 years. But I mean, in the couple of minutes that we have left, I mean, there were two issues for me: transparency during, the conversations, but also going public about agreement, which, in an ideal environment, yes. Admittedly, I think would go a long way in really curbing some of the abuses that Ibrahim was talking about.
Yes, indeed, that's such a crucial element to go public and to be accountable. And keep your voters in the loop as to what concessions are you giving. This morning I happened to be able to see these guidelines that SALGA is proposing. And in there they also say distribute the political positions and compensate the kingmakers. Kingmakers need not be compensated, and that makes for ingrained opportunities for corruption. All that needs to be done is that those kingmakers need to get the assurance that they can promote the policies that elected them into those positions. So it's very important to say what kind of transparency and what kind of openness need to be there. And it's very important that in the legislation already, South Africa has allowed two forms of municipal executive. The mayoral executive, which we commonly have across South Africa, and in a few places, the proportional committee system of municipal executive, which means in that system, the power is automatically, portfolios are distributed in terms of the proportions of representation in the council. And isn't that ultimately fair? And if I talk regulation, I say regulate that is the option that municipalities must follow. And you'll have so much more stability and accountability and ethics.
Quick last word from you, Ibrahim.
No, I mean, on that point we can agree. I think the transparency also we agree on. The thing that's missing from this is that I think it does need an additional thing, and that is a deadlock breaking mechanism, which will subject certain fundamental disagreements to some kind of arbitration and resolution. So that's fundamental. But I think it's, the public. Going public, being transparent about it is after the negotiations going to happen. Let's be realistic. No political party is going to negotiate in the open because they will then be posturing rather than actually negotiating. So let's give them a chance, and perhaps we also need to stop haranguing them. Give them a chance to conclude deals on the way that they need to do so, and then we'll judge them. But ultimately, society has to take responsibility for many of the bad things which happened over the last 5 years, because political parties didn't come there on their own out of a vacuum and decide to do this themselves. They are incentivized by voters and disincentivized by voters.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Special thanks, Professor Boyson, Mr. Fakir. Thank you to both of you for spending the last few hours with me and your incredible insights. And that's it from me here at our makeshift studio. I'm going to hand over to Francis Hurd, who is on the floor here at the National Results Center with our political editor, Mzwandile Mbeje. From me, it's a good night, but do remember that after Francis and Mzwai, we still have Peter Ndoro, who will take you through to midnight.
All right, thank you very much, Vuyo. And we've been chatting to the big parties, the two biggest, experiencing huge setbacks in this local government election. Then, of course, there are some winners in between, some new parties rising, some expanding. Action SA coming in guns blazing in Joburg. But let's look at some of the other smaller